Hey guys, this is FixerMed. Welcome back to my high yield anatomy review series for the USMLE Step 1 NBME CBSE and NBME CAS examinations. In this series, I will be covering a broad overview of the discipline of anatomy across various organ blocks for these examinations. This will be part 49 of my multi-part video series of doing so. Without any further delay, let's go ahead and get started on today's content. Let's start off by taking a look at the fracture of the anterior cranial fossa. A fracture of the anterior cranial fossa, particularly the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, may present with symptoms such as anosmia, loss of smell, periorbital bruising, commonly known as raccoon eyes, and cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, leakage from the nose, rhinorrhea. Let's take a look at the picture to the right. We can see the boundaries of the anterior cranial fossa in green. 1. Sphenoidal limbus, anterior margin of the chiasmatic groove. 2. Posterior borders of the lesser wings of the sphenoid. Let's next take a look at the development of the skull, sutures of neurocranium. Coronal suture, located between the frontal bone and the two parietal bones. Sagittal suture, located between the two parietal bones. Squamous suture, located between the parietal bone and the squamous part of the temporal bone. Lambdoid suture, located between the two parietal bones and the occipital bone. Let's next take a look at cranial malformations, scaphocephaly, premature closure of the sagittal suture, resulting in a small or absent anterior fontanelle and a long, narrow, wedge-shaped cranium. Oxycephaly, premature closure of the coronal suture, leading to a high, tower-like cranium, also known as pterocephaly. Plagiocephaly, asymmetrical, twisted cranium resulting from the premature closure of the coronal or lambdoid suture on one side. All right, guys, now that we have covered all of the content, let's go ahead and take a look at some questions to review the knowledge you have gained so far. A 24-year-old man is brought to the emergency department after a motorcycle accident. He complains of a loss of smell and has noticeable bruising around his eyes. Examination reveals clear fluid leaking from his nose. Which type of fracture is most likely responsible for these findings? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. I'm going to move on to see what the correct answer is and what the reasoning behind it is. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. The correct answer is C, fracture of the anterior cranial fossa. A fracture of the anterior cranial fossa, particularly the cribriform plate of the ethmoid bone, can lead to anosmia, loss of smell, due to damage to the olfactory nerves, periorbital bruising, raccoon eyes from blood pooling around the eyes, and cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, leakage from the nose, rhinorrhea, due to a breach in the cranial cavity. All right, let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. The incorrect choices can be explained as follows. A. Fracture of the zygomatic arch. This type of fracture typically results in facial asymmetry, cheek flattening, and difficulty opening the mouth, but it does not cause anosmia, periorbital bruising, or CSF leakage. B. Fracture of the maxillary sinus. This can cause facial swelling, epistaxis, nosebleeds, and infraorbital nerve damage, but is unlikely to lead to CSF rhinorrhea or loss of smell. D. Fracture of the mandible. This results in jaw pain, misalignment of the teeth, and difficulty chewing, without causing symptoms like periorbital bruising, anosmia, or CSF leakage. E. Fracture of the occipital bone. This can cause posterior head pain, potential damage to the brainstem or cerebellum, and occipital nerve damage, but it does not typically present with periorbital bruising, anosmia, or CSF leakage from the nose. All right, now that we have covered this question, let's move on to look at the next question. A 6-month-old infant is brought to the pediatrician by his parents, who are concerned about the shape of his head. On examination, the infant's head appears elongated and narrow, with a noticeable ridge along the midline. A diagnosis of craniosynostosis is made. Which suture is most likely prematurely closed in this infant? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. I'm going to move on to see what the correct answer is and what the reasoning behind it is. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. The correct answer is B, sagittal suture. Premature closure of the sagittal suture, a condition known as scaphocephaly, results in a long, narrow, wedge-shaped cranium. The sagittal suture runs along the midline of the skull between the two parietal bones. When it fuses early, the skull cannot expand sideways and instead grows longer and narrower to accommodate the growing brain. All right, let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. The incorrect choices can be explained as follows. A, coronal suture. Premature closure of the coronal suture, which runs between the frontal and parietal bones, results in brachycephaly or oxycephaly, characterized by a short, wide head or a high tower-like cranium, not the elongated and narrow shape seen in this case. C, squamous suture. This suture is located between the parietal bone and the squamous part of the temporal bone. Its premature closure is rare and would not typically produce the long, narrow head shape described. D, lambdoid suture. This suture is between the parietal bones and the occipital bone. Premature fusion of the lambdoid suture results in posterior plagiocephaly, causing asymmetry at the back of the skull rather than the elongated and narrow head shape. E, metopic suture. The metopic suture runs from the top of the head down the forehead to the nose between the two halves of the frontal bone. Premature closure leads to trigonocephaly, a triangular-shaped forehead, rather than the elongated, narrow shape described. All right, now that we have covered this question, let's move on to look at the next question. A 1-year-old child is brought to the pediatric clinic for a routine checkup. On examination, the child's head is noted to be unusually long and narrow, with a prominent midline ridge. The anterior fontanelle is small or absent. Which cranial malformation is most likely present in this child? All right, I think I gave you guys enough time here. I'm going to move on to see what the correct answer is and what the reasoning behind it is. If you need more time, feel free to pause the video. Otherwise, moving on now. The correct answer is C, scaphocephaly. Scaphocephaly results from the premature closure of the sagittal suture, leading to a long, narrow, and wedge-shaped cranium. This condition is characterized by a prominent midline ridge and often a small or absent anterior fontanelle, as described in the child's presentation. All right, let's go ahead and see why the other answer choices are incorrect. The incorrect choices can be explained as follows. A, oxycephaly. This condition, also known as pterocephaly, results from the premature closure of the coronal suture, causing a high tower-like cranium. This does not match the elongated, narrow head shape described. B, plagiocephaly. This condition involves asymmetrical skull deformity, often due to premature closure of one side of the coronal or lambdoid suture. It results in a twisted, asymmetrical head shape, not the long and narrow shape described. D, trigonocephaly. This condition arises from the premature closure of the metopic suture, leading to a triangular-shaped forehead. The presentation of a long, narrow head does not align with trigonocephaly. E, brachycephaly. This condition is characterized by a short and broad head shape due to the premature closure of both coronal sutures. It does not match the long, narrow head shape described in the question. All right, guys, that is all I have for the video today. As always, be sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more videos like this if they are beneficial to you. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, please feel free to type them up in the comment section below. Anyways, guys, this is FixerMed signing off. Be sure to have a great day, everyone. Good luck studying as always, and goodbye.